I went into this expecting to be disappointed, partially because the MCU should have died with Tony Stark, and also because normal people are beyond sick and tired of Pedro Pascal. Much to my surprise, I wasn't. I enjoyed it and I wouldn't mind seeing it again. I know it's a pretty low bar these days, but this is legitimately the best MCU we've gotten in quite some time. From the opening with the TV special where they explain who the Fantastic Four are and how they came to be, along with the nice bouncy score that perfectly fits the whole 60s vibe, the whole retro future look is pulled off perfectly. They've been the Fantastic Four for 4 years already, but if you walk in knowing nothing about them, you'll have a perfect sense of who everyone is. This is also hands down the most straightforward MCU movie that we've seen in years. There's no homework needed, nothing you have to watch to understand what's going on, and no callbacks to previous MCU anything. A complete standalone movie. Unlike everything else that we've seen lately, Fantastic Four is about the Fantastic Four. It's not a setup or a lead-in to the next MCU product. The plot is simple but effective, the story is laid out clearly, and the pacing is great. The dynamics between the four of them actually feel like a family, and yes, there are jokes, but it's not the typical played-out MCU humor. It really does feel like the ribbing you'd get between siblings or that cousin that you grew up with. Having said all of that, there's still one glaring problem. Pedro Pascal is not Reed Richards. The dialogue he's given in this is fitting for Reed Richards, the smartest man on Earth. The problem is that none of it is believable coming from Pedro. Now I will fully admit that part of this is due to his massive overexposure these days, as well as his inability to shut the fuck up about his personal politics, which puts him firmly in the Mark Hamill territory where it's impossible to separate the two. I thought he did an amazing job as Joel in The Last of Us, so yes, I can give credit where credit is due, but I just can't see him as Reed Richards. Every time he's on screen, you're reminded that you're watching Pedro Pascal, and I say this as someone who has rewatched Stranger Things countless times, but never once during Fantastic Four did I feel like I was seeing Eddie with Joseph Quinn. I felt like, hey, that's Johnny Storm. Speaking of Johnny Storm, this appears to be yet another case where saying less would have been more. Much like James Gunn making it sound like Superman was going to be a woke immigration allegory. Spoiler, it wasn't. Superman had issues, but being woke surprisingly wasn't one of them. There was a bit of a fuss a few months back about how Johnny Storm would be portrayed here. Myself and Kevin were speaking about previous iterations of him and where we are culturally. He was branded as this womanizing, devil-may-care guy, but is that sexy these days? I don't think so. This version of Johnny is less callous with other people's feelings, and hopefully there's a self-awareness about what's driving that attention-seeking behavior. In this day and age where masculinity is something to be shunned and needs to be, shall we say, modernized in the eyes of Hollywood, this kind of statement gives people reason to think they cucked Johnny Storm and maybe you should skip this like the rest of the MCU lately. But, much like James Gunn talking out of his ass on Superman, that wasn't the case. Johnny isn't a man whore or anything, but he takes one look at the Silver Surfer,
bite my shiny metal ass,
and you absolutely believe that he'd like to. Johnny Storm was fantastic in this. Out of the four of them, he felt like he had the best character arc and went from being seen as a goofy kid to a proper part of the team, even going so far as to try and make the big move in the final battle. More on that in a bit. Ben Grimm was a super chill, regular dude. We see him going to bodegas, talking to the kids, and getting hit on by their teacher. He feels like that solid family BFF who's been friends with your dad since forever, and he's like an uncle to Johnny. Also worth noting how comic accurate the Thing looks in this.
There's a handful of fascists that I would just throw into outer space. That's what I would do.
I guess he's as much of an asshole as Pedro. Given how any female role seems to be handled these days, and that Pedro would have no problem rolling over for a woman, I expected nothing less than full girl boss with Sue Storm. We definitely get a bit of that with her being on the cover of the magazine and her nice little speech at the Future Foundation. She's also the one who answers the Silver Surfer and speaks to Galactus first. After Galactus tells them he'll spare the Earth in exchange for their son, and she makes her big dramatic speech about family, at least a lot of her actions can be explained as understandably protective mother versus MCU girl boss. It doesn't feel like she pushed Reed out of the way. More like she steps up to be a leader instead of him. Is he timid? Is he scared? It's not really established, but he's supposed to be the one in charge who comes up with the plan that they execute together. Yes, Reed Richards does ultimately come up with the plan for the finale, but it does feel like they went out of their way to give the big Galactus defeat specifically to Sue and not the Fantastic Four as a team. Speaking of Galactus, this This right here is all we should have seen of Galactus in the trailers. It sets the tone perfectly and lets you know that this is a threat unlike anything you've seen so far, and that you're pretty much f***ed. The first time you actually see Galactus on screen is still badass, but it could have been terrifying if this was the first time you really got a good look at him without all those sneak peeks along the way. Less is more, and studios used to understand that, but that doesn't change the fact that you should go see this on the biggest screen you can for Galactus alone. He gets introduced about halfway in, we get to see him a pretty decent amount for the last half of the movie, and it completely makes up for having to listen to Pedro desperately trying to sound smart. Now, much like I expected to dislike Fantastic Four overall, I thought I'd have more issue with the female Silver Surfer. Yes, I know her name is Shella Ball. Yes, I know she was actually in a handful of comics, and no, I don't care, we're gonna call her the female Silver Surfer because this was an absolutely pointless gender swap, and it served literally zero purpose. There's nothing really particularly woke about her character. They pretty much gave her Norrin Radd's backstory, sacrificing herself to spare her planet and her daughter. Was it a stupid modern audience kind of thing to do? Absolutely. Did it make a huge difference in the big picture? No, not really. The closest we get to a full MCU girl boss moment comes at the end. Galactus doesn't end up walking into their trap, so we get Sue literally pushing him into it instead. Is Sue Storm strong enough to push Galactus around? I don't know. There's a lot of variables that go into comic book battles. I'm also fairly certain Reed Richards can stretch a lot more than this, but it was Pedro getting his ass kicked, so I'll allow it. For the purposes of this movie, I suppose she is, and she does. Until he claws his way out, giving Johnny Storm a moment to shine, which is taken by the female Silver Surfer, who kicks him in instead. I guess Galactus was heavy as the strain of all of this kills Sue until she's revived by her power cosmic baby. They also swore all of this was filmed with a real kid, but that baby looks freakishly CGI at different points, but that doesn't really matter. Nice happy ending before they're off to their next adventure. Now there's a post-credit scene several years later where Sue walks into the room to see a now toddler-aged Franklin with a maskless Dr. Doom. They swear that this cameo was actually done by Robert Downey Jr., and I'm sure Disney would never lie about such things, but just like the freaky CGI baby, it doesn't really matter. Ultimately, this was a pretty decent movie. Truly the best MCU we've gotten in a long time, but it really does get brought down by Pedro Pascal. Not just here, but also knowing that we're going to see him in the inevitable sequel, as well as the unprecedented that will be Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars. Also doesn't help knowing that Disney will probably learn all the wrong lessons from this doing well, and end up thinking we want more of Pedro, but it is what it is. Call this a 7 out of 10, with a few of those points being for Galactus alone. Seriously, if you're gonna go see it, then go see it on a big-ass screen.